Hello and welcome to the Blue Room post-match. Bournemouth 3, Everton 0. Something that looked, I think, a lot worse. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get your view on that. Those of you listening to this to us, it's me and Rob Vera trying to reflect on what was another atrocious evening down on South Coast against Bournemouth. 3-0 this time. It was 4-1 on Tuesday just gone. Rob, I'll let you get to crack on this in a second. Some really, really ugly looking scenes at the end of the game as well, where a few of the players were obviously over with the fans. It looked like a few of them were apologised, and it looked like obviously the fans weren't happy, saying some things towards them and whatnot. We don't know what's going to come of that, or indeed if there's anything to come of that. But a few of the players look particularly upset with some of the things that were said and done. No doubt that'll come to wash at some point, but nonetheless, Rob, I'll let you go first here, mate. That first half for me, and I tweeted this at the time, and it's easy to get the aesthetics when this happens during the time of it, but even now, half an hour after the game's finished, well, nearly 40 minutes after the game's finished, I'm still sitting here thinking that's amongst the worst I've seen. Certainly that first half is amongst the worst I've seen as a 34-year-old Everton fan, or I certainly think it's up there with some of the worst I've seen. It was absolutely dreadful, and what are your reflections on this?
I mean, it's a combo platter of despair. It's an appetizer sampler of horror. It is. You can start wherever you want. I don't even know where to start.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I came into this thinking we would win today, which who knows why I felt that way. I think I thought I probably had that kind of feeling that a lot of us had before Crystal Palace, which was, they're under pressure. It's time for them to perform. It felt, and even maybe a little bit of the same feeling going into West Ham, which was sort of like last, got to get this win to kind of help us figure out how we feel about this side, whatever. But I mean, the bottom line is that I don't even know what to compare it to, because we've now hit bottom for this season. And with Everton, we seem to quickly discover that there doesn't ever seem to be a bottom. And so I think that when you are a side like ours, that based on the squad construction was essentially told to operate this season with the finest of fine margins, then you're going to have those times in the season where we scrape by with these draws or a 1-0 win here or there. I mean, obviously Palace was just such a weird exception. I mean, we that's not us at all. That was just one day. I don't know what to think. I mean, who do you start with blaming here? I mean, the players played badly. I think Frank Lampard is struggling to come up with answers. Well, clearly he's struggling to come up with answers, and I think that I'm a bit discouraged at times when it feels like the answer he comes up with is basically not changing things very often. But at the same time, I whenever I say that, Dave, it's like, well, what would you have him do? I know that there are tweaks, there are things with the midfield. I'm sure there are things he could do. Maybe I'm not smart enough to know, but I think that, to use the old expression, trying to shuffle chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
Yeah.
I don't know what you do when this director of football, this board, left Frank Lampard with so little this summer in terms of attacking. I think that a lot of us on transfer deadline day, Dave, shouted, from the rooftops that it was not acceptable for this side to not bring in quality attacking players. Everton brought in reclamation projects, guys who were depth players on mediocre sides who had no use for them anymore. I'm talking about Neil Maupay. I'm talking about Dwight McNeil. They also, combined with that, made the decision that Dominic Calvert-Lewin was going to just, he basically had done nothing the previous season because of injuries, and that they went in with sort of a hope as a plan methodology of saying he'll bounce back. I mean, that'll work out. And they also combined that with the decision to not sell Anthony Gordon, which is looking like an unmitigated disaster right now. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anyone say, well, they didn't really offer us, 60 million. Forget that. I mean, if they offered 35 to 40 million, given how little he had actually done at Everton, and given the fact that just given how far away this thing is from being competitive, you don't make a single young player your hill to die on when they're not unless they are an undoubted bona fide superstar, which Anthony Gordon, who didn't even start this game, mind you, who has been shocking since the transfer deadline closed. There's just so many bad decisions that were made with this squad construction that inevitably, I understand, because it's becoming a tradition like no other, to just kind of reflexively go to the let's sack the manager place. And look, Frank Lampard is not doing anything right now to make any of us feel sorry for him if he does get sacked. But let's be honest. If you can sack the manager right now, and if that makes you feel better, great. And if you think bringing in a manager with yet another set of ideas and another system and whatever is going to solve the fundamental problem of an attacking group that is subpar, feels like a compliment, Dave. Like there is not a single attacking forward player for Everton that has any business starting games in the Premier League, period, end of sentence. If you are even a competitive squad, you would have Damari Gray, Dwight McNeil, Anthony Gordon, Neil Maupay. Those guys would be backup players at best. And I mean at best. I'm not sure a good top half of the Premier League side has any of those players outside of Gordon, who I still think has talent, but certainly is not a player that you kind of draw a line in the sand on and say, well, we're not going to sell him. Anthony Gordon is a core piece we're going to build our future around. I mean, they left themselves so short in the summer, and we had managed to use smoke and mirrors up to this point to sort of get by and scrape by with results, and lots of memes about dads in the center of our defense. And
this is the point I want to get to in a second.
Yeah, which was going to magically just solve everything, and it hasn't. It just hasn't. And this is the final thing I'll say, and I know you'll go on to talk about the defense. Today was the day where the chickens came home to roost on our defensive form, because we have been playing with fire for most of the season. Going into this game, we were the third or fourth worst side in the Premier League for expected goals against, which is a gauge of what ought to happen versus what does happen. And I grant you that is not a perfect metric, but we have been fortunate. We have had our goalkeeper save our hides time and time again. And today he didn't and couldn't, and we saw what it looks like when you have so much discombobulation throughout the side. It's not all in the defense. It's not all in the midfield. A lot of it's on the attack, but it's really just in general a squad that did not have, outside of Amadou Onana, genuine top flight quality brought into the side, in terms of young talent that you can build upon. That's the question I would ask everyone who is watching this thing right now. Outside of Alex Iwobi and Onana, And I guess you could make your cases for the fullbacks because they're still young. And I'm talking about outfield players here. Pickford, Pickford had a bad game today, but he saved our ass all season. I want to know which of these are pieces that you actually think you want to build around and would move forward with. There just aren't many. There aren't many at all. And we sold a true foundational piece in Richarlison, which we had to. I get it. He wanted to go, and that's just how this goes. But once he was sold, to have no plan to replenish this thing from an attacking standpoint. And you can say, well, we almost signed Mohamed Kudus. Well, look out that window for all the starting 11 for Everton's almost signed players over the last half dozen years is quite a starting 11. I don't want to hear that. You either get it done or you don't.
Yeah.
They failed spectacularly in terms of what was needed to keep this side out of another relegation scrap. I thought that the midfield reconstruction was good enough that we're going to be pretty mediocre, but we wouldn't be relegation bad. Well, boy, was I mistaken. Whenever you think that Everton, can't get worse, they find a way. And so that's where we're at. I'm angry. I'm sure you are too, Dave. And I'll take a breath from here.
No, and you covered pretty much everything there, but there are a couple of points I want to focus on that you mentioned there that have made me more angry than certain aspects you felt angrier than me about. And that is, I think the way in which the defense, well, let's say the back five, just to the canter, the back five, Pickford, Patterson / Coleman, the two centre backs who've, I think the only people you can't really, other than today, because I think they didn't play well today at all, but those two in Tarkowski and Cody have generally been okay. And left back in Michalenko, I think the people are a bit sort of up and down about him, certainly in what he can offer going forward, but certainly defensively, I thought he was okay. And not today, by the way. In general, I think you could put a blanket over every single one of them that was on the pitch today and say it wasn't good enough anyway. The real issue that I've got with this now, that's come about, ironically, and when's it never thus with Everton, after that Crystal Palace game at home, which sort of set the blueprint for us all to look at each other and think, yeah, that's what we want to see. Look, you're not always going to win games 3-0, but Everton playing the way in which they were against Crystal Palace was something that encouraged us all to think, oh, hang on, can we do something this season? Can we click together? Can we do that, let's say, more often than not and get enough points to get us up towards mid-table and things like that? That was eliminated almost immediately, wasn't it? After certainly the Leicester performance. Fulham was half decent. We got a point away at Fulham. They must be absolutely devastated about only getting a point against us at home, given how we played since then in the two games against Bournemouth. But the sort of general main point that I'd like to make on the post-match here is about the one line by name, line by nature defense in inverted commas that we've had was the thing that have prevented us looking absolutely abysmal and almost certain to get relegated this season. And that might be a little bit too far. Many people may see me saying that as a knee-jerk reaction to this game, but I don't think I am. Because I've considered.
No, because it's been coming, Dave. Like
exactly
that's the
right.
thing. Everyone thinks that. Oh, look at our defensive record. As if it's. Look, I love that we've conceded fewer goals, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Tarkowski and Cody have not played well for large parts of this season. Yep. But there were a lot of people acting like those two came in as if they were some like world-class defenders and solved this defense, which they didn't. They had poor games today, by the way. But I'm not suggesting that it was a mistake to bring them in. I am suggesting though that for all this talk that everything was solved defensively, it is a pure myth. There's so much more to defense than just four players.
Well, this is it. So my general opinion towards this is, we've had, let's just say the two of them, the two centre-backs, we were really happy to sign on a minimal value of money in the transfer window. Yeah. They've been walking on a tightrope, and I don't mean that in a way of which I'm thinking, oh, they've got away with this, they've got away with that. I mean walking on a tightrope.
They have gotten away with a few things, Dave.
No, they have. But what I'm saying about the one thing that has been the most trustworthy aspect of us getting any sort of results that aren't defeats in games has probably been those two and Pickford.
Agreed.
Now, when I say walking on a tightrope, I don't mean it in the conventional way of thinking, do you know what, if those two if those two cock it up, we're going to fall, we're going to get beat, i.e. referring to actual Premier League football. I mean it in the sense of they've just about been the ones who've kept everybody else in that side in front of them. The front 6 or 7 in front of them. They've saved their necks in a lot of games, because most of them have been really, really poor or not consistent. Now, you can go into many detail about even Onana, who you mentioned there. Just a kind of guy I think has been atrocious since we've been there. Then you looked at the wing positions. You've spoken quite at length there about Gordon. Gray.
Damari Gray was absolutely abysmal tonight and has been for most of the season.
Yeah, McNeil. Mopé looks like one of the most dreadful signings we ever made, because we all, every single game that's really pissing me off is we're trying to play long diagonal balls to a guy who's 5'8".
Yeah,
It's just simply
not his game.
It is
Does
not
him no
going
favors.
to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. What's the alternative? I'll tell you something right now. We put on that young lad Cannon towards the end for the last 15 minutes or so. I saw more out of that lad in 15 minutes. Certainly holding the ball up, getting other players into play, wanting to try. He nearly scored himself with a decent half chance, header chance that he had towards the end of the game. I looked at, you see a kid come on and embarrass the ones you've paid money for and regular Premier League players. I mean, that's 1 goal in 22 games for Mopé, by the way, before he came to us, and both since he's been with us. That to me, I mean, I don't know if the egos of footballers make you think that, but when you're walking off a pitch thinking, do you know what, that kid's just come on and took the piss out of me because I've barely done anything and he hasn't done much to look better than me. That to me, and again, going back to us referring about the defences, the tightrope side of things that I refer to is, as soon as they don't have a good game, we're in deep shit. And today epitomised that for me, because I don't think Cody and Tarkowski were anywhere near as par as they normally are when they play for us. You normally get a consistent 6, 7 out of 10. That's why they're at the level they are as professional Premier League footballers. When that doesn't happen, we are just open wide, waiting to be defeated, comfortably defeated though. And the issue that I think sort of rumbles on from the defeat in the Carabao Cup is that he decided to make 11 changes. When you initially, and I said this in the post-match after that, when you make 11 changes there, you've automatically put pressure on the guys you put back in, because the reason you're making the changes you have is to make the priority the game that comes after it in the Premier League. And that's what Lampard's done. I don't look at that and think, oh no, what's he done there? He shouldn't be doing that. I personally didn't think he should be doing that, because I'm still thinking, do you know what? I'm pretty old school in my mind. I'd love us to stay in a cup competition as long as we possibly can and maybe try and go and win a trophy. Shock horror. But I understand when other people say he's changed the 11 because he's prioritised the weekend game where we need to get 3 points quite desperately to get up above the bottom 4 or 5 sides. So that automatically puts that albatross around your neck, if you like, when you're going into that game. And that's what he did. And then lo and behold, what happens? Everyone that come back into the side didn't look like they were either, I'd say, fit, but good enough to be able to perform against a Premier League side called Bournemouth that were below us in the Premier League. And that's the main thing that stings at me. That's the main concern I've got with Frank Lampard. I know when the club's journalist itself interviews him, there's never anything that I listen to and think, oh, I think they're atrocious questions, but they're going to be, because they work for the football club. They're not going to ask anything that's going to put pressure under a player or a manager. I am looking forward to hearing his reaction to the other media across the country, wise, whoever gets to interview him or whatnot. I am quite interested to hear that, if they're able to speak to him in the way in which you want them to, and ask what his idea was here. What's the tactical plan that you've got in these games?
You know whose opinions I'd be more interested in, Dave? And I know that I do the whole... you can roll your eyes if you want to.
Oh, go on.
But one of my favorite, and I don't mean you, I mean the royal you of like the people listening, but one of my favorite things after most games in professional leagues growing up over here is that that locker room gets opened up, and players have to actually answer questions about, well, what did you think of this today? Why did you struggle with this, that, or they at least come out to do a post-match, they're part of the post-match presser where, at least three of the key players come out there and have to answer questions. It is, and I'm not saying that because, oh, well, I think they should have to deal with the firing squad and the humiliation of questions too. No, I think it's simply that I would like to know what is on their mind right now about why they feel they're struggling.
Yeah.
We are always constantly left because of the kind of, this is how it's always been done, sport media structure in England, that, and in Europe in general, that, the only one who we have this sanitized kind of club conversation with the manager afterwards. You then have the press that gets to ask the manager some questions afterwards. But I mean, I don't know I think what Lampard and any manager in his position probably struggles to come up with is a way to say the same thing over and over and over again. Lampard, Frank Lampard is probably not long for this world. There are some very reasonable questions to ask him about what kind of manager he is. But what I will tell you is that Frank Lampard knows what a functioning attack looks like, and he probably has some strong opinions that he is not allowed to say about what is at his disposal. And he can't say those things. So I would like these players to at least be able to answer, like, why do they feel like they're struggling? Why do they, like, I want to know their actual thoughts, and we may not get any more real truth from them, but it is frustrating to me that ultimately we are left with not knowing about their thoughts on this recent dip in form. We don't really know their thoughts. For instance, like, we've got this grainy iPhone film of what happened after the match and the kickoff between the players and the fans. Are we going to hear any specifics about what happened there? Maybe not. It's really frustrating. But the bottom line is that we can talk about, and we haven't even talked about the refereeing and how awful that was in the first half, but I don't really care to give this squad and this manager more excuses, and this club more excuses. Yes, it was terrible refereeing in the first half. The second goal should not have even been counted, but frankly, when you lose 3-0, you can pick and choose what you want about referee incidences, but you've been thoroughly outplayed, and frankly, 3-0 is probably flattering to us in that match. Dave, like, we were really that bad. So when you're that bad, there are questions that have to be asked, especially as we go into a break like this, because let's be honest, we've got a long time before these players play again, and so that is a horrible taste in the mouth that they can't get rid of very easily going into this World Cup break. And now we're left with all of these questions that are more about, how is Everton going to, once again fight off relegation this season? Is it going to be as bad as last season? I still am cautiously optimistic it can't possibly be, with a better defense and a better midfield. But the manager either has to get something more out of it, but also this club cannot use the old excuses of, well, January is a tough market, and we're Dominic Calvert-Lewin is going to be back after the World Cup break and he'll be okay. Like, the solutions to this thing are not going to be magically solved or be produced by a new manager, and B, are not going to be produced with any reconfiguration or redeployment of the current talent in this squad, Dave. They absolutely have to bring in it. I mean, I don't know how you can't bring in at least 2 attacking players that start games for you. And I'm aware of the pitfalls of spending money in January, and that there are no sure things. How do you get players who are going to be of that quality in January, and blah, blah, blah.
And also the additional amount of money you have to spend to get players.
Well, but you know what? You know how much it costs to get relegated, Dave? You know how much it costs to going into a new stadium that may or may not be fully paid for? Do you know how much that costs when you are now a championship side? Like, I have seen this league and the sides in this league find ways to, scrape a few pounds here and there. Everton have to find a way away. And frankly, let's be honest, if they were throwing in bids on the last day or two of the window for attacking players, don't tell me they don't have money in January. They've got some money in January, and they're going to have to really scrape some together. And I don't know how. I'm not sitting here saying I have all the answers for that, but frankly, Dave, I'm tired of, and I'm sure you are too. We've been doing this podcast for a decade
Years.
or whatever, years and years. I've been part of this thing now for a long time. I'm tired of having to try to come up with, all of these really meticulous solutions. There simply have to be people at the club who say, this is a problem. We've just got to find a way to solve it and go and do it. I'm tired of saying,
Are you convinced that there are, though, Rob? Are you convinced? Because I've not been ever convinced. I can go as far as saying that these days. I've never been totally convinced, probably apart from when, I'm talking recent years, the Ancelotti was there in regards to how you coach and teach players and get the most out of them for a spell. And let's say it's a short spell, given the amount of years we've supported the football club. But what you've just said there is absolutely spot on, in that us as fans, the amount of different people, former players, even current managers that we've had on the Blue Room in the past, I can't think back and think, oh, do you know what? That's how we do this. That's how we go about getting some sort of success out of this club. And what the one we see right now is exactly the complete opposite. In that this that looks to me, more often than not so far this season, as a side that won't be playing in the Premier League. I've despised and spoken quite vocally about this World Cup that's about to start in just over a week.
Yeah, pretty lucky now, aren't we?
I'm really happy that it's taking place right now, because we go 7 weeks without seeing Everton, without Everton having to kick a football. Now, that is actually, I think, quite fortunate that we're in that position, because we have a minimal amount of people who are going to be going to the World Cup. There's one player I want to talk about before we finish ahead of that. Let people who listen to this can guess and probably have in their mind who I'm going to speak about, because we haven't really mentioned him yet so far, and he played today. But also, I look at that squad we have. We've got to go over to Australia, playing the friendly against Celtic, and the other game against one of the Australian clubs and all that. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure how useful that is when it happens. Obviously, it's going to be treated as if this is something that we need to work on, and Lampard has got a considerable amount of time to work on this squad. But how much has he actually got to work with? What can they go and prove from that? I'm undecided on what I think about that, to be honest with you, rather than seeing them stay here and just graft away until the Premier League restarts on Boxing Day at home against. We play Wolves at home on Boxing Day as our next game. That is huge. Wolves are below us as it stands. That is huge. You've still got to play this week.
And let's be clear, though, Dave. And if I'm going to find a silver lining in this sea of shit, I'm going to tell you that the best news for Everton, for us as fans, and I don't want to sound like, oh, well, I'm sure, because I know I could have probably said something akin to this at this point last season too, right? But I think if there is good news, it's that we still have 23 matches in the league left to play, more than half the season. Okay. So there is time. And as we saw today, if we had won today, we'd be up, we would have moved 5 spots up. I mean, there's a lot of tightness in there. And I'm not saying that is a reason to hope, because, look, we are going to go down if Everton don't address things that they failed miserably to address this summer. I think in terms of analysis, the best thing for me is that there is a segment of Everton supporters that you and I have probably talked to on Twitter quite a bit. I've certainly dealt with them, who said that the summer was actually a really good, success. We did really well, pretty well in recruitment overall. Yeah, it would have been nice to get another attacking player, but we've solidified things and blah blah blah. Well, how solid do you feel about this now? What is the value to you of of the improvements in the squad here and there if the overall result is about the same, right? Like we're we're losing in different ways. We might be losing closer games, but it really isn't that bit. Like at the end of the day, results are results are results. We have got to find a way to improve. We've got to find a way to import some solutions into this thing. And by the way, Dave, like, I am glad they're going to Australia. I think the worst thing that, like, what this side does, I'm sure they're gonna, if some of them are going to get like a week off. They're probably everyone gets like at least a week off, but you know what, they need to immediately get back onto that pitch, not having to worry about games for a bit, and just focus on fundamental things like passing the ball, fundamental things like, decision making in the final third. That sequence with Damari Gray today, where he kept dribbling and looked like he was going to put in a cross and looked like he was going to put, and then just kicked it out of bounds, to me summed up our feeble attack. And that kind of stuff has just got to change. This side has got to find ways to be better and play better. And I know that I'm rambling here as if I'm saying all these obvious things. I know that I am, Dave. I know that the solutions aren't as simple as Lampard telling the team to try harder or to simply shoot more. I'm not expecting, I don't think that all the answers are simple. But what I will say is that regardless of whether the answers are simple or complicated, they're going to have to come one way or the other. And that is going to, I think that the idea that, like, I think that if you were going to replace Frank Lampard right now, I guess you could do it. But I'm just saying, how many times do we have to keep saying, well, let's just get in a manager that can do something? Like, I don't know what manager is going to succeed with this little talent. I just don't, like, on the attacking side in particular. I don't know. And I think that you could get a slight manager boost and then you're back in the same place, because even if a manager comes in, has new ideas, changes the formation, blah, blah, blah. If you can bulldoze a building as many times as you want, Dave. But if you keep using the same bricks to build a new building that are as feeble as these bricks are, the same result is going to happen. That house is going to come down at some point. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like it is.
yeah.
Like I love everyone who thinks that it's as simple as getting a new manager in. And I know there are some of you who say, well, we can do both. We can get a new manager and do this. Hey, fine. But for me, I'd like to see, man, and this sounds like a defense of Lampard, and it's really not. It's more about just acknowledging the reality of the situation. I would like to see Frank Lampard and his staff given at least some competent attacking talent, and where he's not been brought in the middle of the season to save everything, and I think the failure to do that this summer is really the biggest culprit here. But if he's given that talent in January and he still can't kick on, then you've got your answer. But I again, if he gets sacked, I won't shed a tear, because this is the business that he has chosen. This is his chosen profession, Dave. But I just don't know. I'm not convinced that any manager comes in with this squad and that meager attacking group and succeeds. I don't see it.
I think that's a really important point to make as we end this one. We'll also have almost like a part two post-match, probably for the very first time we've ever done this, actually, because Peter Mack is going to join me in a bit as well and give me his sort of view of what's happened after this game.
Who's the player you wanted to talk about, Dave?
I wanted to talk about is Jordan Pickford, because towards that scene at the end that we've still yet to find out what actually happened over at the end of the pitch, which leads me on quite nicely towards Warren, who's been down there as part of the Blue Room. He was actually there at the game, and he's done a tiny little review, and as and when the players come over after the match as well. So you can hear that towards the end of the podcast.
Do you want to hear what Frank Lampard just said about the altercation at the end of the game?
If you can go through it quickly, Rob, go on.
Yeah. On an altercation between the fans and Alex Iwobi, this is from Ben Grounds of Sky Sports. Quote, there was a misunderstanding. Alex had some friends that he was concerned about that were at the front of the fans. There's nothing in that. The players just have to accept that the fans have a right to voice their opinions. End of quote. So it doesn't sound like there was anything,
what you think, what many
said.
people, the things that go in many people's minds, which I don't want to actually say myself, to be honest with you, because it's neither here nor there anyway, since what Lampard said. But I mean, for him to, whichever way it happens, I mean, we have to take Alex Iwobi at face value, because if it wasn't anything else, then he would have said it, and he would have done that behind the scenes, and we'd have seen a fallout from that to happen. So I'm sort of relieved, and I wouldn't go as far as saying pleased, that you see arguments between fans and players and whatnot. But Frank Lampard's,
but why Alex Iwobi though? God,
I mean, I know.
Best player this season.
He's one of he's probably the furthest away from anybody you really want to criticise by what's happened so far this season, and certainly in the last 18 months at the football club. But quickly, we've only got 2 minutes left here. Quickly, just wanted to say about Jordan Pickford, who his attempt to catch the ball on the first goal was, and I'm chuckling as I say it, as I'm running it back through my mind. It was quite embarrassing, borderline funny. Certainly to people who are not Evertonians, by the way, but it was. I have no idea what he's trying to do. Drops the ball, and they score the goal, which sort of sets the tone for the rest of it. Jordan Pickford's going to Qatar and going to be the number one goalkeeper by and large. We pretty much get that he'll be the number one for Gareth Southgate for England whilst they're there. I have a concern about that. Well, I have concern about the World Cup, full stop, to be honest with you. But the odd couple who are going there, Onana's going to be going there. Who else is going over there?
Gay and Cody. Yeah, we got four. Cody. Gay, Cody, Pickford.
We've got four who are essentially, in the spine of our club, to be honest with you. So I hope, not that I don't want them to do well, but I could actually really do with them getting back as soon as possible, because there are big, big things to address as we head towards 2023. I know personally I'm really happy to wave goodbye to 2022 for all sorts of different reasons, but Everton just about stayed in the Premier League. Let's hope we're not sitting here in 4 or 5 months' time having that same conversation and still everybody's biting the nails to the fact that we're not confirmed as a Premier League club, as Bramley Moore approaches as well. Could it happen at a better time? Rob, absolute pleasure, of course, and no doubt we'll be speaking a hell of a lot more. This is obviously the last post-match of 2022, but we've still got bagfuls of content coming up, not just Everton-related misery, but loads of other featured stuff, bit of fun stuff for Christmas, and everyone starts chilling out in the festive period. But Rob, I'll leave the final word to you here, mate. We're going to be all right, aren't we?
Yeah. You asked me that question.
By the way, I just need to say that there's not the delay that you heard between me and Rob there, just because he's in the States and I'm in Liverpool right now. That was a break of concern, I would say, that Rob's just made there whilst he was breathing.
Well, Dave, also the weekly tornado alarm here in Oklahoma City is going off right now, and what a time for it to go off as soon as you asked me the question about whether we're going to be all right or not. Look, I'm angry today. The form is unacceptable. The problems are, like this time last season, the problems were we had a rash of injuries, terrible defense, a shambles in midfield.
10 seconds.
I think we have some more solid pieces this time, but we've got to figure it out. We've got more than half the season to do it, so let's do it.
Spot on. Rob, absolute pleasure. Like I said, Peter Mack is coming up shortly to do the second part of the post-match, and we'll hear from Warren Down in Bournemouth as well. Thanks so much for listening to us. Bagfuls to come, as I say. Keep tuning in, theblueroomefc.com, and I will speak to you around the other half of this post-match podcast. Welcome to part 2 of today's post-match reaction to Bournemouth 3, Everton 0. I suppose in the space of 180 minutes of play, it's Bournemouth now 7, Everton 1, which is extremely embarrassing considering the way both games are being played by Everton Football Club, the way in which each of the players, by and large, simply didn't perform and created a lot of anger from the away fans that have made such a distant trip down to the south coast over the last 4 or 5 days. Some of them have stayed down there, and in my opinion, in Rob Vader's opinion, which you'll have heard on the first half of this podcast, it's simply not acceptable enough for what Everton are trying to achieve and what we're trying to achieve now. I think it's crystal clear as we go into Christmas, as we go into 2023, is making sure that we keep our Premier League status once again. I've got Peter McFarlane as promised with me now to take part of the second part of this podcast. Pete, we spoke, as you can imagine, and as you'll probably hear when you listen to the first part of this, that was simply unacceptable from Everton today. We spoke, I think, at length about the 11-man change that he made for the Carabao Cup, effectively saying that it would have been nice had we gone through to the next round, but it certainly wasn't Frank Lampard's priority by making 11 changes. He put in the players that he prioritised for the league game back into the side, and as far as I was concerned, and I still say this because we come up with it, we all of us after we've watched games like that come out with like knee-jerk reactions, don't we? And I said that that's probably one of the worst first halves that I've ever seen as an Everton fan. I can think back of a lot, and there are a lot to go through if you're that sort of inclined to want to think back of how bad Everton have been in the years gone by that we've been fans of for all of our lives, mate. But that was dire today, and the most concerning thing, and I mentioned this to Rob a little bit earlier, I'm actually glad that there's a 7-week break before Everton play a Premier League game of football again. And I've been dreading and hating and not wishing it was happening this World Cup that begins in just over a week's time. Right now, Everton have been that bad and played that poorly. I'm actually glad that there's a break this long where we can perhaps somehow try and fix things. I know we've got to travel to Australia, a couple of friendlies, and there's only, I think we've only got 4 players travelling over to Qatar. Important players for us, obviously, in Pickford and Cody, Onana's going, and Adrissa I think's the 4th one. So, in general, mate, and I know you travel to most Everton away games every single season. You'll be, I think, the one privately at home, you're probably thinking, I'm really glad you didn't go to this one. But what were your overall thoughts on this? Because I'm bewildered, to be honest with you, mate, and I'm glad I'm not going to be watching Everton playing for a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Dave, yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad that I've missed the last two away games. I'm glad that I haven't travelled down. First and foremost, I'm just gutted for the fans who have made that journey twice in a week, or even ones who've just made one of the 2 journeys. I think to go to Bournemouth and to see the 2 performances that we've seen. I mean, it's hard enough just watching it from home. Never mind having to travel down and then travel back as well. So I'm sure those fans deserve more. They deserve the players to show more. They deserve more from the manager. They deserve more from the club from top to bottom. To be honest with you, I'm just I was the same about the World Cup. About this World Cup, I'm totally indifferent about it. Whether I'll end up watching some of it, I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But I certainly wasn't looking forward to it in any way, shape, or form. Having said that, at the moment, I'm absolutely delighted that it's about to start, because it does just give us a break. And it's not even necessarily a break, for us to try and put things right. I just mean, like, mentally a break for the fans, because watching Everton at the moment, it's so dire, it's so frustrating, it's so demoralising. It's absolutely, every Evertonian, I think will probably be feeling the same way. Today, just like the other night, it could have been the same 11 players, to be honest with you. It could have been the same 11 who started on Tuesday. It could have been the same players out there, because the system was exactly the same. The style of play was exactly the same. The total non-impact on the game was exactly the same. Very few chances, very pedestrian, lackluster. We look vulnerable at the back as well, which hasn't happened too often this season, but we look very vulnerable at the back. I think it was just a disgrace, Dave. And to be honest, it had a feeling of, when you get towards the end of the season, when you're safe and that, you can't go up, you can't go down, you're just sort of there. And you have those sort of games towards the end of the season where the players just sort of go through the motions and just want to get the game out the way. That's what it felt like today. And these players need to wake up to the fact that if we don't start putting performances in after this World Cup break, if we don't really, improve drastically, we're going to find ourselves in a relegation fight massively, come the end of the season.
I mean, a lot of people, and you do, like I said, that term knee-jerk reaction, you do, a lot of people have that reaction when your teams play poorly, even when your teams played really well. I mean, look at our reaction after we beat Palace 3-0. The post-match, then we were like, this is how we want to see Everton play. If we do that more often than not, then we'll have a really good season. I say really good season, we'll have a comfortable season. That looks a million miles away for one. But the one barrier I think that we can all agree on this season has been how we've been defensively for the large portion of the first sort of almost to reach halfway start of the Premier League season. We were one of the best clubs in regards to goals conceded. We were leading. We were the best club defensively only a few games ago. Now that's disappeared. That always felt to me as being the one barrier in this squad against the opposition that we play that you ended up quite proud of. And I think that now just looks like it's completely escaped, because today is probably the first time, even though we've suffered quite embarrassing defeats at times so far this season, this was the time I looked at it and thought, I don't have the sympathy with those centre-backs anymore, who I thought have largely done a good job so far this season with Cody and who else is on there? Cody and Tarkovsky, and obviously Michalenko and Patterson / Coleman's being the back four in general. I looked at that today and I thought that's the biggest worry, the biggest thing that's sort of shining in my mind, where I'm thinking the alert's flashing now, where I'm thinking, yeah, they're the sort of things you often see when clubs struggle for the season, is when the defence starts to leak serious amounts of goals. Let alone the other side of the main subject that I've been thinking about is the 11 change, and there's a big discussion on social media about the change that we made back on Tuesday night. He decided to make 11 changes from the game against Leicester. Now, many people would say, yeah, well, they should have been making changes from how we played against Leicester. Fair enough, and I think that's a fair comment for many people to discuss. But when he puts in what he establishes, what's obvious is his best 11, in his mind, his opinion, the way he is with Paul Clement and everybody else who's amongst the staff, that 11 that he decided to rest on the Tuesday night is the team is decided is going to be the one that gets us a really important result down against Bournemouth, who were below us before the game today in the Premier League. They were in 17th place, we were in 16th place. That, in my mind, almost immediately puts pressure. It does put pressure on the shoulders of your manager. It puts pressure on the lads coming back in. And I'm sure they'd relish that when they've been told that in the middle of the week or in training, that they're going to be the guys who are going to be relied upon to get us, or to at least not get a loss, not lose a game that's so crucial for us as we wait now 7 weeks for the mini break before we return to the Premier League on Boxing Day. The fact that they've come in and that's gone in complete reverse, it looks so bad. Given that defeat on Tuesday as well, makes everyone look really, really poor. And now all of a sudden you've got 7 weeks before you can prove people wrong, before you can. It's not like normally when we've lost games and we come out the following week and win some and start playing well, and you'll maybe see sort of the green shoots of recovery when you start seeing games like that one against Palace, like when we played to get away against Southampton, when we beat West Ham at home. They're the only 3 that we've won. And when they happen, you're like, do you know what? We'll be sound. If we can play like this every week, we'll be sound. But to us, that's a rarity, and it's the difficulty, and it's the thing that I'm really worried about now that we come back. Yes, we're not in the bottom 3, but you look at how tight that bottom half of the table is. That home game against Wolves when we come back on Boxing Day, that's a huge 6-pointer, I think. And I'm not exaggerating there to say that, am I?
No, not at all. It's a huge game. It's a huge game. And like you say, the problem we've got is as well, it's not even like over 7 weeks we're going to have the team together where we can actually work on things. The window won't be open either. It's not like we can make any signings during that time to really sort of change things. Like you said earlier on, we've got to go over to Australia as well, which I think is bizarre. if it was up to me, that trip would be cancelled, and I'd have them in Finch Farm every day from now till Boxing Day.
This is an important part here that what we didn't focus on too much. We did mention it slightly in the first half of the pod, me and Rob, but this is an important point here that you've made that I'd like to get more emphasis on this from yourself. This to me is much more of a advertising idea about us going out to Australia, because you see this often when there's winter breaks for other clubs across Europe, but when you see clubs when there's an international break, often managers and other clubs will go over to Dubai or hotter countries to have that sort of level of training whilst other players are away playing in international games or friendlies or whatnot. That to me backfires. And I think you've sort of hinted at that yourself. It backfires when I think this is there's going to be I think naturally, and obviously I'm not trying not to speak like I know there's fact of this, but it must be because they're only human, that when you get to go away for some heat in the middle of winter in our country where it gets pretty dire weather-wise for training and whatnot, some of them must think, oh, do you know what? That'll be really comfortable, and maybe they start to relax and whatnot. I think if I'm asked as an Everton fan, what would I like to see my team and club and squad doing whilst others are away, whilst the other four lads are over in Qatar competing in the World Cup? I'd like to see them with the heads down, trying to get in as often as they can, trying to fix things that are so much of a problem for us, the manager included as well. Going over to Australia, like you've just mentioned there, playing Celtic and one of the Australian clubs as well while we're over there, there's going to be a lot of fan-related activity and things like that. I'm far from thinking that that's the best way we should be dealing with this,
Oh, Dave, honestly, it's the last thing. It's the last thing we should be doing.
Yeah.
The absolute last thing we should be doing. And like you say, we go over there, they do a load of press junkets, they prepare for a game against the mighty Celtic, missing 4 players anyway, so 4 of our key players. So we go there, and for what? What is the purpose of it? In the summer, I can understand it. I can understand doing a little pre-season tour and things like that. But we're going to Australia to play. We're only playing 1 game as well, aren't we? So we're going to the other side of the world, literally. Taking absolute. It's going to take a good week of our schedule away from us, if not longer, just to play 1 game against a team who are 100 miles away or however far away they are in Glasgow. I personally think it was a ridiculous decision to even contemplate doing it mid-season, regardless of the World Cup. It was a ridiculous decision, and I'd still feel the same even if we were at the other end of the table. But given our current position now, it's the last thing in the world we should be doing. And I'd rather we just sent the kids over at this point, to be honest with you, give them some experience, because these players, this first 11 of ours, they need to be in Finch Farm every day. Frank Lampard needs to be working with them. And to be honest, Dave, one of the other things as well that we spoke about the other night after the first Bournemouth game, after the cup game, I'd said to you that I don't think that Frank Lampard is infallible. I don't think he's beyond reproach, and I stand by that. And one of the other things as well that I said was that what I didn't want him to do is go down the Roberto Martinez route of being too stubborn to change. Now, unfortunately, we're getting to the stage now where every single week we are seeing the same awful football, one-dimensional football. We never look like scoring a goal. Our front players look completely clueless and totally disjointed. We don't seem to have any kind of game plan, which actually looks like we are trying to actually score a goal, which is what the sport is all about. And as I say, if Frank Lampard isn't willing to work on himself and work on his formations and his tactics, then unfortunately, where do you go? Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to sign 11 new players in January. Even if we can get through to January and then make a couple of signings, he's not going to go out and sign 11 players. He's got to work with what he's got. And we can see week in, week out that the system and the formation that he is playing right now doesn't work with these players. You can't put, square pegs in round holes. He's got to find a way to get these players working, and that has to come down surely to tactics and formation.
Yeah, I think that they're such important opinions, and also I think it leads us to wouldn't go as far as saying it's a discussion that we don't want to have, but the many times today. And I think it's cropped up and cropped up and cropped up more and more since Leicester. Since, I mean, that we've three defeats in the spin now, haven't we? Possibly since the Fulham game, I think people quietly started to creep into them about Frank Lampard's future with Everton Football Club. I think you'll have seen this by now, I'm sure, on social media, the issues that happened at the end of the match when all the players walked over to all of our fans who are quite rightly very, very angry. I know it spews a little bit too far by some and whatnot. And I know Frank Lampard's released a statement, so he's spoken about it, about what the incidents were that he had, because he's seen a couple of the players getting really upset and angry, and it was any speculation as to what it might have been said or what wasn't said, and I'm sure we will find out what happened that in general. But when you start seeing that, and sadly, it's not the first time we've seen it in games when we've been away from home. You think back about Brentford last year, when Seamus came up. Did you go to that one? Did you, Pete?
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, you'll remember that quite well, won't you? It'll stick in your minds when Seamus Coleman's coming over and the fans were just irate. In the reaction, and rightly so. You know, you there's that phrase, isn't it? You pay your money.
It happened a lot last season.
Exactly. You're an Everton fan. You want this club to do well. When people don't, who are getting an extreme amount of money and essentially supposed to be professional Premier League players, what do you expect fans to do and fans to say? It's similar to this podcast. Now, in my career as a professional journalist, for now 15 years I've been doing it. I was quite close. When I worked at Radio City, I was the journalist that had to go and do every press conference at Finch Farm, and it got to the stage a couple of times when Everton were in really dire straits, when it come to ensuring Premier League survival, losing games which they should have won or should have done better, or there's been players that have been sold, or there's been issues with transfers and the board and whatnot. And obviously it was difficult for me personally, and there's probably a story I should tell at some point on a different show. We'll have plenty of time across Christmas, won't we? Because we won't be playing. About speaking to Robert Elston when he was there, obviously Bill Kenwright and things like that, and some of the awkward conversations he used to have in regards to what the club didn't want to have to answer. And I thought, no, that probably ends my integrity as a journalist, because those questions should be answered. Now, I don't think we're like that these days, thankfully. Although having said that, I think if you heard in the last 2 times when it's gone out on Twitter, the club journalists who asked Frank Lampard questions, and again, knowing some of them as I have, I completely understand the way in which they can't ask a question that I would ask or you would ask as a fan, because they essentially work for the football club. So they're sort of the twixt in between, really, to be able to ask Frank Lampard what they actually want to and what the club doesn't want to actually come out and say, and whether it's critical of the manager, of players, whatever it is. That's the way journalism works, unfortunately. And it's nice. I think the odd occasion, the one that sort of sticks in my mind the most over the last few years is when Seamus Coleman come out after that woeful performance against Wolves, when we still had Marco Silva, if we call it, Pete. And he come out and actually was really, really honest. And he come out and said, that's unacceptable. We've got some home truths and whatnot. Obviously, that's not verbatim in terms of what he said, but it was along those lines. And after that today, I'm thinking, do you know what? We probably need a moment like that. We need somebody to come out and say this. Frank Lampard himself could come out and say it. And he has. He was pretty honest from the quick interview I saw. He said this, like, it is sort of unacceptable. We can't play like that. And I think he's like that, Frank Lampard. I do like him in that regard. But ultimately, there are a lot of players now who are getting into a situation, and this is going to get more and more active towards this game against Wolves, which is over 7 weeks away on Boxing Day. That is Frank Lampard. Essentially, is his job on the line. A lot of people are saying he should have already gone. You know, dare I say it, there's been a lot of rumours about David Moyes' future at West Ham. If he was to leave that, you know where that goes, and a lot of people will start speculating over that sort of thing. where do you stand personally? Because I'll do my opinion in a minute because it sounds like I'm trying to dodge it, but I'm not. Where do you stand with Frank Lampard as Everton's manager? Would you go as far as saying it's ridiculous to go along with that notion of people actually questioning whether he should be our manager or not? Do you feel as if it's correct to do that given our record, or do you sit there and think, do you know what? These same amounts of players largely were so dreadful under Benitez, and before that, toward the end of Ancelotti's time with us. Do you think, well, these players have not been able to give, or simply haven't give? Benitez, obviously, a million other different issues with him, but Ancelotti towards the end of his time, and Frank Lampard just about came in and we saved ourselves from relegation. And think, well, it's on the players, this. And I have to be honest before I completely reveal mine, and you can answer yours first anyway, because I'm a bit of a shitbag like this. But I'm saying I'm somewhere in between, thinking, yeah, there are a lot of issues Frank Lampard's got as a young football manager, but also I look at a lot of these players and think, what on earth are they playing at? How on earth can they look at themselves in the mirror when they've seen that level of performance, in inverted commas, against the likes of Bournemouth, against the likes of Leicester? I lean more towards that than I do with the manager, because we've sacked so many managers in the past. Getting the new ones in, apart from potentially Ancelotti, just haven't worked. And there's been a lot of players in deadwood that we've had to get rid of. And I feel we're more at that situation than we are in regards to completely saying this is Frank Lampard's fault.
Yeah, I'm again. I'm going to sound like a bit of a shithouse myself here, but I'm on the fence as well, because I can see the reasons why people would want him gone. I think any supporter is entitled to their opinion. I think that some supporters have never been on board with Lampard, and that's fair enough. I personally am of the opinion that we can't just keep sacking managers. I would be more inclined, in terms of a restructure, if things carry on. Surely there has to be some kind of review in terms of his backroom staff.
See, that's the beauty of it. Just before you continue, Pete, that's just the beauty of being a professional player in the Premier League these days. Is you do a lot of the time are completely shielded from any of this. That it's always the manager has to go. Well, why are you saying the manager has to go? Well, he's the only thing we can change, because we can't just simply say to players, you're getting off, and you're getting off, because they're all in contract. So we can't do that. With a manager, it's a lot easier to sack a manager than it is to get rid of players, as we've proven.
But that's the thing when I talk, because at the end of the day, if you change a manager, all you're doing is basically changing the figurehead, and you're changing who's going to be taking the day-to-day coaching and training. At the end of the day, it's not actually that much of a massive change when you bring in a new manager, unless they're going to bring in a completely different style of football.
We've proven that. We've proven that, because what is this now, the 6th or 7th manager we've had in the last 5 or 6 years under Managerial.
Exactly.
We've proven that, because we've still been largely shit under whichever one it's been.
That's it, because fundamentally you're still working with the same players, but the trick is to try and get the best out of the players that you've got. Now, the problem when you get a new manager is that you always give the new manager so many months to sort of get used to the players that he's got, and the new manager comes in, he'll have an opinion about a player from the outside. When he actually gets to work with them, he realizes that player isn't quite the player that he thought he was. So then, you have all that sort of thing. You go through the motions for the first probably 6 months while the manager tries to figure out, who they want. At the moment, we've got so many different managers, players who've been signed by so many different managers. We haven't had any kind of consistency in terms of the type of managers we've got, in terms of the type of style we want to play. As I say, I think what needs to happen before we start going down the road of just sacking Lampard, what needs to happen is that Lampard needs to have a look at himself and look at how we are playing and how he's coaching the players. What system is he trying to implement, and just figure out a way to get these players playing their best football. Get them to bring the best out of the players that we've got. Because as I say, we're not going to be able to go out and sign 11 new players. Whoever comes in.
That's the issue, though, Pete, as well. That's the other sort of facet of this that I wanted to bring in, is that You'll get like a lot of, because obviously our fans are generally have always been very, very divided in their opinions that they give. It's not often that we have a large majority of fans in the all sort of pointing in the same direction here. But the one other thing as well that obviously we'll discuss across the festive period up until Everton return on Boxing Day is about the recruitment side of things. Now, all of us were largely quite happy with the exception of forwards. And we only got Mopai in, who's looked, to be fair, in my opinion, I don't think he's looked any good whatsoever, because we seem to continuously, and maybe this is where you do bring Lampard in, you do bring the staff in us playing long balls. We have two centre-backs who love to play long diagonals. Well, that's all well and good. If you've got someone who can challenge in the air, we've got somebody who's 5'8" at the other end of the pitch. That's not going to work. When you want to get the ball out to your wingers, when you want Gordon to get into games, and you want Gray, when you got McNeil on, you've got lads there who can comfortably cross the ball. But that's not going to work when you're trying to ping it in to a 5'8" lad. And look, I'm not trying to slate this fella, but it just simply it doesn't simply work. He's only scored 1 goal in 22 games. That obviously includes this season and towards the end of his time at Brighton, who, Graham Potter, who's no more, he's the new Chelsea manager. He was happy to sell that lad whilst he still thought he was going to be the Brighton manager. So that probably says a lot about why we were able to get him. And I'm not too sure like where this theory has come that this works. Does it come with the director of football? Well, does it go with what Lampard wanted to see? These are questions that we've had for so many years now about, how recruitment works. When we had Brands in, when we had Ancelotti in, who's responsible for this? We're still asking that question now. Is a certain percentage of it down to one? Is most of it down to another? But when you've got to a stage now where you're now looking down the barrel to the transfer window in January, Everton are going to desperately need some new players. How that works, how much money we've got to spend, how we're able to get rid of some of the ones we don't want anymore in January is notoriously very, very difficult and often doesn't happen. You can't go out in January. Well, you can't, obviously literally can, but in terms of reasonably, you cannot go out in January and are able to conduct the business that you absolutely need to make your club better. And this is where things get more and more difficult, I think, for Lampard himself, because if he walks up to Managerial and the rest of the board and says, look, we badly need a striker. We've got Dominic Calvert-Lewin there who's injured quite a lot. He's a bit of a crock, to be fair, over the last 18 months. We can't just rely on him as soon as he gets fit to put him back in, because when we did do that, he didn't look any good at all and looked unable to score. And we just got the odd goal, didn't he? But we should have took 3 points of Fulham because he missed an easy chance. He missed a couple of decent chances against Leicester. We've got a striker that we can't rely on, simply put. And I know it might sound harsh to some because they like him, probably a minority really now who refer that to him. But then, you need somebody, and then you're saying what I've just said there about Mopai. Honestly, behind closed doors, if they're having an honest chat about the squad we've got at the start on January the 1st, when the window opens, Lampard, I would imagine, will be sitting there with a general idea of, look, how are we going to score goals if we haven't got a striker that can score goals? And that's our situation. We have a striker who's either injured and doesn't score goals in recent months, or we have a lad that we brought in from Brighton who's a workhorse that doesn't score goals anyway. Yeah. What's the plan now then, Frank? And everybody else who's involved in this, and I'm trying not to just single him out. We just don't simply know as fact how recruitment works in that regard. Frank Lampard must have his own suggestions to be able to say to Thelwell and the rest, I'd like this, and then they're able to say, okay, that looks decent, we'll do this, but we've also got this, and this. That's just what he wants, let alone how difficult it is actually going to get them, because it's very, very difficult in January, as we've always known. So this is what makes me so scared about what we're about to approach in this period when we do return at the end of 2022 into 2023. And with Frank Lampard at the helm, these are things that I think are really, really concerning, that he can turn this round.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing as well to bear in mind is that, since we sold Romelu Lukaku and we spent like $500 million on all these players, I'm just off the top of my head, we've never really replaced Romelu Lukaku I mean,
No.
for one, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I think we paid about 1.5 million for him. You know, he sort of played a little bit in the under-21s or under-23s, and then came up into the first team. Sandro Ramirez, obviously, that just didn't work out. He was, you know, we paid what, 5 million for him, and then gave him ridiculous wages, and he obviously ended up completely flopping. Moise Keane, probably the biggest outlay we've put on a forward. Was he more of a sort of a wide player, but you know, he was signed as a centre forward, and obviously that didn't work out. Then we've got Morpie, Solomon Rondon. At the end of the day, we've never actually gone out and replaced Romelu Lukaku. We've spent all this money on midfielders, number 10s. You remember that when we sold Lukaku and we signed 3 number 10s that same summer for some bizarre reason. We spent literally hundreds of millions on those types of players, but we've never actually gone out and bought ourselves a top class striker. So I think that, you know, the chickens have come home to roost now. This isn't just the making of Frank Lampard or Kevin Thelwell. This is mismanagement for the past 4 or 5 years, which has come back to bite us. We've had the warning signs for the last couple of seasons. Last season should have been a massive wake-up call for Everton Football Club, especially losing Richarlison in the summer. I think everyone was saying that, you know, the forward line, we were happy with some of the business, getting Tarkowski, getting Cody in. I think that they were 2 signings, but at the end of the day, they can't do
anything, Pete. This is no exaggeration. Those 2 lads,
they're the only reason we're not bottom of the league.
Oh, no, they're 90%, and I'm being probably kind to some other players in the normal 11 that we have. Those 2 lads, in addition to Pickford, are the reason why we aren't in the bottom 3. And also, I haven't said that today. The 3 of them, that's the worst I've seen. The 3 of them.
Yeah. But the thing is,
that's what's a concern, isn't it? Because sorry, Pete, that's why it's a massive concern, this loss today. Because the 3 that sort of do keep your head above water with the consistency they've got defensively, when they're not playing well, there's nobody else amongst the other 8 players that they're with that I look and think, do you know what? They can get us out of the shit. They can do something decent for us. There's absolutely none of them. And I include Onana, who's showing some bursts of how good and potential this lad's got as a young midfield player. Getting Idrissa Gueye back, the sort of emotional feeling we had getting him back, that's all gone as far as I'm concerned. Gordon, all the signings we've made, that is absolutely gone for me because I don't trust any of them to be able to rely upon when we play, let alone away, at home as well. If you've got 3 lads that can't, which they didn't today, perform what we need them to do, that's probably right at the top of the list of the concerns that I've got, and there are a lot of them that we've mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at teams, you know, before we play a team, and I look at them and think, who am I worried about today? And you can normally name like 2 or 3 players in a side who you can think, right, yeah, you know, they've got a good record against us, or they're tricky, they're fast, they're good at, you know, they're instinctive finishes, so they only need one chance to score a goal and things like that. Someone's big, strong, powerful, someone who's good in the air. You can normally find attributes in every team who you play against and things that you can be cautious about. I look at Everton's side genuinely, and I look at it and think, who would I be afraid of playing against? Which player? If I was the opposition, who would you look at in the Everton side and think, oh, we've got to keep an eye on him? And I genuinely think, like, I couldn't name you one.
Well, you'd say the only one that sticks out a little bit's Iwobi, isn't it? But Iwobi's not like a threat, though, is he? Like, no, because if I was playing against Iwobi, I wouldn't be thinking he's going to score. He's going to score like because you've got no one else who can help him. You've got no one else who can help him. That's the problem. The lad could have the game of his life, but still not score a goal or not assist a goal because there's nobody there who can either score or help.
Yeah, exactly. But I look at Bournemouth today, and I tweeted during the game and said that the sad reality is that every single one of Bournemouth's forwards would walk into our first 11. Yeah. And that's Bournemouth.
Even Solanke, we all used to take the piss out of when he was at Liverpool. And
I'm not even saying he's a good player.
Him for 20 million to Bournemouth, didn't he?
Yeah, that's it. I'm not even.
How sad
I'm not saying that these are good players.
Exactly. You probably. Do you know what? I'd have a look at taking him ahead of Mopai because he scores and he's a big lad. He can hit the ball. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the
thing. Again, but he's got attributes that you look at and go, right, well, yeah, that's what he can do. But I genuinely look at Everton's team now, and certainly our forward line, and think, what threat do we have? Like, what what is it? What could you narrow down and say, right, we need to stop like X from scoring today for Everton? We haven't got anyone. Like even
No,
back
and
at,
also if you are able to do that, if you reverse what you've just said there and say, oh, who's the defensively, Everton have been all right this season, certainly up until recently. So let's say the last 2 weeks, Everton have looked one of the better sides defensively in the league. Then who do I look at that I have to stop the other way? I just simply look at us and think, oh, you know what, we'll do well to get a draw. That when people say they're playing Everton, they must look at it and think, you know what, we've played poorly if they get a point from us. Because they can't score. They can't score. We started today, Mopai, and I want to end this. We've only got a couple of minutes left, Pete, but I want to end this on a tiny little positive. We obviously started with Mopai, Damari Gray, and McNeil as the front. Well, I say front three in inverted commas. It wasn't really a front at all, was it? If we're honest about it. But young lad Karen come on, didn't he? Towards the end, and he looked bright. He looked like he wants to get involved. He actually looked like the only person who come close to scoring a goal because he actually hit the target with a header. This is the length we're getting to now. And if Frank Lampard's the manager putting on a kid who's barely kicked a ball for our first team, that shows you where we are at. And that's no criticism of the lad. I'd love to see him play a lot more because he looks like a real talent. But a real talent should be coming into a team that is going to help him thrive. And we don't have a team that's going to help him thrive. So, I actually felt sorry for him the minute he came on.
Yeah, I did. And again, we discussed this on Tuesday night that, we were saying that if the cup game was almost just an excuse to give a few players a few minutes on the pitch, why didn't he start with the game with some of the younger players, the likes of Cannon, the likes of Mills?
So half-assed, wasn't it, by Lampard?
Yeah,
that start, that, and I banged on in this podcast, but that's why how much I believe in it. The fact he made 11 changes was to prioritise this game today, and it was an absolute backfire because the 11 that came back in were just as bad, if not as worse, as they were the reserve team that he basically fielded on Tuesday in the Carabao Cup.
The other thing as well about it, Dave, was after the game, he pretty much said, all these players who've been banging on me door asking for minutes, well, they've just proven to me why they're not going to get any. So what the message then to the first 11 is, don't worry, your position's safe. You haven't got any competition anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I never even thought of it that way. That's as well. You're thinking they're probably sitting there with a cigar thinking, you know what, I'll be playing at the weekend, but he's going to rest me in these shitty cup games. Probably do if that happens again, when it comes to the FA Cup, third round of the FA Cup in January, he certainly hasn't learned his lesson if that's the case, you know what I mean? But we have sadly ran out of time, mate. It always goes really quick when we start ranting about Everton, doesn't it, really? But anyway,
it's just what I needed, Dave. Nice one.
Brilliant. And you know how much we've got coming up. And I know it's pretty dire at the moment as Everton fans, but we've got loads of stuff coming up until, certainly obviously not post-match, but obviously there's focus with Pete as well on Everton women, but we've got bags of stuff coming up on both our free line and also for our subscribers on Patreon. So do keep checking it out. There's loads of fun stuff coming up, as well as the sort of the doom we're having to talk about right now with this football club. But thanks so much for listening. This has been a bumper post-match to finish. I'm going to say finish 2022. We haven't quite finished 2022 because we've got that Wolves game. Then we go to Manchester City on New Year's Eve as well. Things are getting easier, aren't they? Anyway, let's hope things get better. And I suppose the one sort of positive is we're not in the bottom three. We're getting a hell of a lot closer to it. We'll speak to you soon on the Blue Room. Thanks for listening. And finally, just before I go, we've got a short clip of Warren, who was down there. He's part of the Blue Room. He was down at Bournemouth at the Vitality and just sort of reviews the game himself that he saw. And obviously you can hear in the background as the players walked over to speak to the fans and some of the sort of scenes that you've heard of already, no doubt, on social media and within the press and whatnot. Here's what Warren had to say, and thanks so much for listening to us, and we'll speak to you soon.
It's Warren Doyle here from the Blue Room. That's full time at the Vitality Stadium. Bournemouth 3, Everton 0. And there's a lot of angry Evertonians here in the way end. Not a lot of happy people here. Something I think has been thrown at Alex Iwobi. He's not happy about it at the minute. He's trying to single out the person who it was, but a lot of Evertonians not happy here with that performance. Pickford now is coming over to talk to the fans, just ask about what's going on. It's a nasty scene, to be honest with you. It's really not pleasing to see. And your players here demonstrating with the fans. There's a lot of supporters not happy here, really not great scenes. Referees coming over, Craig Parsons coming over to see what it is, trying to get Jordan Pickford out the way. Someone's just thrown the shirt back, someone has thrown a shirt. I presume one of the players, or I hope he's giving his shirt to someone in the crowd. Whoever it is in the crowd has thrown his shirt back. The Everton players have come over, met with a chorus of boos after what was an abysmal performance. Lampard's put his hand up here to say apologies, but it's not been met well at all by the Evertonians in the away end. And you can hear the reception as well. In all truth, Bournemouth dominated the game. Everton never looked like scoring. Lampard's trying to usher away some of the players from the away end. Seamus Coleman's still trying to contemplate what's happened and trying to have some sort of discourse with the Evertonians. Applauding them now and they're applauding them back. They recognise what Coleman's done, but ultimately the Everton fans in the away ends here are not happy with what in truth was an abysmal, terrible performance down on the south coast. Where that leaves us, I don't know. I've been a stark defender of this team since the start of the season. I thought that we were on a new course. I didn't think we were ever going to make anything great or do anything great in the league this season, but thought at least we would compete and battle, and we've conceded 7 goals in 2 games against the relegation threatened Bournemouth, who I'm not showing anything other than the fact that they are a top-end Championship League side, but there we go. Going to leave you now. It's Warren Doyle live at the Vitality Stadium from the Blue Room. I hope you enjoyed the World Cup, because I'm not going to. All we can hope for is Everton come back and improve massively in the new year, because that's what is needed. Anyway, up the Toffees.